It was July 1967 at the International Amphitheater in Chicago. Elvis had just stepped off stage when a teenage girl burst into tears behind the curtains. No one knew her name then, only that she was trembling and starstruck. Elvis handed her his white silk scarf, not realizing that girl was Cher, and that years later, she'd reveal a truth that stunned everyone. July 16, 1967, Chicago's International Amphitheater. More than 20,000 fans packed the hall, their cheers rolling like thunder through the concrete. Flashbulbs popped. Sweat glistened on the stage lights. Elvis Presley was at the peak of his power. Every movement met with screams that seemed to shake the rafters. Backstage smelled of hairspray, coffee, and nervous energy. Technicians shouted cues over the crackle of radios. A young singer, 21-year-old Sherilyn Sarkeesian, stood near a stack of amplifiers, clutching the hem of her sequin dress. Sonny Cher had been booked as part of the warm-up set, a daring choice in a night ruled by the king of rock and roll. Cher's hands trembled. She'd grown up singing along to Love Me Tender in her bedroom mirror, dreaming of meeting the man who'd made every word sound like a promise. Now he was only a few feet away. The curtain rippled as Elvis stepped through, broad-shouldered, radiant under the glow of backstage bulbs, still catching his breath from Jailhouse Rock. He laughed with his road manager, Joe Esposito, a low, easy sound that cut through the chaos. Then his eyes swept the hallway and landed on the girl frozen by the equipment cases. She tried to smile but couldn't find her voice. Elvis nodded politely and kept walking.
Cher exhaled, dizzy.
Then something unexpected happened. A stagehand rushed past, tripping over a cable. The microphone stand toppled, clattering to the floor beside her. The noise made Elvis turn back. He knelt, lifted the mic, and looked up at the nervous young woman beside it. "You all right, honey?" he asked, that unmistakable drawl gentle and kind. Cher nodded too quickly. I'm fine, Mr. Presley." He smiled. "Call me Elvis. Everyone else does." The way he said it made the world slow down. The crowd outside was still roaring. But here, in this narrow hallway lined with silver cases and cigarette smoke, everything felt calm. Elvis handed her the microphone as if returning something precious. "You sang that opening number, didn't you? The beat goes on. Good song." Her mouth opened, but only a faint thank you came out. He grinned, noticing the tremor in her voice. "First big crowd." She nodded again. "I've sung before, but never like this." Elvis wiped sweat from his face with a white silk scarf, then looped it loosely around his neck. "Crowds can smell fear," he said with a wink. "Best thing to do is sing louder than your nerves." That line made her laugh, a small sound that broke the ice. For a moment they just stood there, two performers at different ends of the same dream. He'd already conquered the world. She was still trying to believe she belonged in it. The muffled chant of "Elvis, Elvis," thundered through the curtain again, calling him back to the stage. He started to turn away, then paused. "You'll do fine out there, Cher. Just remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about being real." She froze. The words sank deep, simple and impossible to forget. Elvis gave a final nod, pushed through the curtain, and disappeared into the light. Behind him, Cher leaned against the wall, heart pounding. The roar of 20,000 fans swallowed every other sound. She touched the spot on her hand where his fingers had brushed the microphone into her palm. In that second, something shifted. The fear was still there, but it had changed shape. Less like panic, more like fuel. She whispered to herself, "Be real." Outside, the crowd erupted as Elvis began the next song. Backstage, a young woman closed her eyes and realized she'd just witnessed the start of a legend crossing paths with its future. What would you have done if you were standing there, face to face with your hero, unable to speak? When Elvis finally noticed her frozen in place, what he did next no one expected. The concert ended in a storm of applause that rattled the walls of the International Amphitheater. It was past midnight, but the air still hummed with electricity. Outside, fans were pressed against the barriers, shouting Elvis's name as limousines idled under the yellow glow of streetlights. Backstage, the noise faded into a muffled echo. Technicians rolled cables. The sweet inspirations laughed softly in the distance, their harmonies still hanging in the air. But near the corner of the dressing hallway, a young woman sat on a metal chair with her face in her hands. It was Cher. Her eyeliner had smudged from tears, and her sequin jacket shimmered under the dim bulb above her. The adrenaline of performing had drained away, replaced by the sting of self-doubt. "I messed it up," she whispered. "I shouldn't have been here." A sound technician tried to reassure her, but she barely heard him. She kept replaying her set in her head. The missed note, the stumble in her timing, the tiny crack in her voice. She imagined the headlines. Sonny Cher stumble before Elvis's crowd. The thought made her stomach twist. Then footsteps echoed behind her. Slow, unhurried, familiar. "Elvis, 5 minutes." Someone called from down the corridor. But instead of heading to his suite, Elvis turned toward the trembling girl on the chair. He stopped a few feet away, the stage lights from the open curtains spilling a golden halo behind him. His white jumpsuit was open at the collar, and his scarf hung loose around his neck, damp with sweat. He didn't speak right away. He just looked at her, reading the sadness she was trying to hide. "You did fine, honey," he finally said, voice calm, low. "Don't ever let nerves steal your song." Cher looked up, startled. Her eyes were glassy. "You saw." "I see everything," he said with a half-smile. "It's my job." He took the scarf from around his neck and gently offered it to her. The fabric was still warm. She hesitated before taking it, like it was something sacred. "That was your stage scarf," she said. "Was," he replied. "Now it's yours." For a moment, she didn't know what to say. The noise of the crowd outside softened, as if the world was holding its breath. Then Elvis crouched beside her, resting one hand on his knee. His eyes were kind but serious. "Let me ask you something, Cher. Do you love to sing? Or do you need to?" The question caught her off guard. She thought for a second, then whispered, "I need to." He nodded slowly. "Then you're one of us." Just 6 simple words, but they hit like lightning. Cher blinked hard, trying to hide another tear. "You really think I belong up there?" "I don't think," Elvis said. "I know." He stood, adjusted his belt, and offered her a small smile that carried both strength and sadness. "The hardest part of this job isn't singing. It's believing that you deserve to." Then, without another word, he turned and disappeared into the hallway. His footsteps faded until the only sound left was the hum of the amps cooling down. Cher looked at the scarf in her lap. It was pure white except for a faint trace of stage makeup on one edge. She pressed it to her chest and whispered, "Thank you." In that quiet moment, a truth settled over her. Fame wasn't about being loud enough for people to notice. It was about being brave enough to keep singing when no one was listening. Minutes later, Sonny Bono found her.
"Sir?"
"You okay?" She smiled weakly and showed him the scarf. He raised an eyebrow. "He gave you that?" She nodded. "He said I need to sing because I need to, not because I want to." Sonny laughed softly. "Then I guess he sees what I see." That night, in their hotel room overlooking the city, Cher hung the scarf on the lamp beside her bed. The white fabric glowed in the soft light like a small promise. She didn't know it yet, but that moment, barely 2 minutes long, would follow her for the rest of her life. Years later, she'd still talk about that feeling. How kindness from someone at the top made her believe she could climb too. What would you have done if someone you idolized looked at you and said you belonged? Because when Elvis asked that question, "Do you love to sing or do you need to?" he wasn't just testing her voice. He was reminding her, and maybe himself, why music matters at all. The night after the Chicago show, the city glowed with neon and soft rain. Cher sat by her hotel window, the white scarf draped across her knees. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard Elvis's voice in her head. "Do you love to sing? Or do you need to?" That question became a heartbeat she couldn't silence. Sonny snored quietly across the room, oblivious to the storm of emotion she felt. They were partners on stage, but tonight she felt utterly alone, caught between doubt and destiny. She traced the edge of the scarf, noticing a faint smear of Elvis's eyeliner on one corner. It wasn't just fabric. It felt like proof that someone great had seen her when she couldn't see herself. The next morning, she folded it carefully and tucked it into her suitcase. No one knew she carried it to every city afterward. By the early 1970s, the magic that once surrounded Sonny Cher began to fade. Their variety show was popular, but their marriage was unraveling. Cher's confidence cracked under headlines calling her too strange, too bold, too different. The industry that once cheered her was now questioning her place. One night in 1973, after a bitter argument with Sonny, she opened her old tour trunk and found the scarf again. As she lifted it, a small folded note fell from its corner. Paper yellowed with time. In Elvis's bold handwriting, 5 words stared back at her. Keep singing, even when they stop listening. Cher pressed the paper to her chest and cried. She realized he hadn't just given her encouragement that night, he'd left her a command. That message became her armor. Every time a record label told her she was finished, she remembered that line. When critics mocked her deep voice, she remembered the way Elvis had called it real. And when the spotlight dimmed, she repeated those 5 words like a prayer. Years later, when a journalist asked what kept her going after the split from Sonny, she smiled and said softly, Elvis Presley. He told me that needing to sing is what makes a real artist. The reporter laughed, thinking she was joking, but she wasn't. Cher never told anyone about the note. Not even Sonny. Some stories are too personal to share while they still hurt. But her friends noticed. Before every show, she'd stare at that scarf hanging on her dressing mirror, lips moving as if repeating something only she could hear. When asked once what she was thinking about before walking on stage, she said, I remind myself why I started. Because I need to. That night in 1967 had become more than a memory. It was a promise, between 2 artists from different worlds, bound by the same hunger to matter. There's a kind of quiet power in words spoken at the right moment. A small truth can outlive a lifetime. Decades later, fans would wonder how Cher kept her fire alive when so many faded away. Maybe it wasn't luck or fame at all. Maybe it was the echo of Elvis's voice behind every curtain. She would say it best years later, he didn't save my career. He saved my courage. What about you? Have you ever carried someone's words for years, without realizing they were saving you too? Because long after the scarf faded and the ink on that note began to blur, its message never changed. It was simple and eternal. Keep singing even when they stop listening. It was 35 years later. London, 2002. A grey afternoon when the BBC prepared for what they thought would be a light-hearted interview with Cher about her farewell tour. The cameras rolled, the lights were soft, and behind her, the Thames moved like liquid glass. The interviewer smiled. You've met everyone, Cher. Who was the most unforgettable? She didn't pause. Elvis Presley, she said quietly. The room went still. Even the crew glanced at each other. Her voice softened. He told me I didn't have to be anyone's idea of perfect to be unforgettable. Then she stopped talking, eyes glistening. The silence stretched. You could almost hear the hum of the studio lights. What people don't know, she finally said, is that he told me he saw himself in me. She leaned forward slightly, her bracelets catching the light. He said, we're both fighting to be taken seriously in a world that thinks we're just pretty faces. Those words hit differently now that decades had passed. Elvis had died 25 years earlier, but in that moment he was alive again. In her voice, in her memory. The interviewer looked stunned. He said that to you? She nodded. Yeah. Backstage in Chicago, 1967. I'd never forgotten. I thought he was teasing, but later I understood. He was talking about something deeper. He knew what it felt like to be underestimated. For a second, the pop diva looked like the 21-year-old girl holding a stage scarf with shaking hands. She continued, he saw how nervous I was. He said I reminded him of himself when he started out. Hungry, scared, trying to be seen for more than the glitter. Her voice broke, barely above a whisper. He knew what that loneliness felt like. The interviewer didn't speak. Neither did anyone else. Outside the studio glass, London traffic blurred into motion. Inside, Cher's memories painted pictures more vivid than any footage. She told them about that scarf, how it still hung in her dressing room, how she'd never washed it, how sometimes she talked to it before walking on stage. It sounds crazy, she said with a soft laugh, but I swear he's still cheering for me. Then came the part that made headlines. She said, I think Elvis knew he wouldn't grow old. He talked about time like it was running out. I didn't understand then, but now I do. Her hands clasped together. He wasn't warning me about fame. He was warning me about losing yourself in it. That confession rippled through fans across the world. For years, people had painted Elvis as larger than life. Cher's story made him human again. A man who looked at a frightened young woman and saw a reflection of his own battle. Clips of that interview spread everywhere. The Guardian called it a rare glimpse of the humanity behind two icons. Fans began revisiting old recordings, searching for clues. Any lyric, any line where Elvis hinted at seeing his own vulnerability mirrored in another artist. Cher later said she never expected her words to travel so far. I was just telling the truth, she said. He helped me find mine, and that's what kept viewers glued to the screen. Not just nostalgia, but recognition. Everyone has felt unseen. Everyone has needed someone to notice the spark inside them before it went out. What about you? Have you ever realized too late that someone saw you clearer than you saw yourself? When the BBC segment ended, the producers thought the emotional moment was over. But Cher stayed seated, staring into the floor lights. Under her breath, she whispered, He told me I was unforgettable. Then she smiled faintly, the same mix of gratitude and ache that only people who've been truly understood can feel. Decades after that brief meeting in Chicago, his words were still singing through her life. And she wasn't finished. Because Cher was about to reveal one final truth, something she kept secret until that very year. And it would change how the world remembered the king of rock and roll forever. August 1977. Las Vegas shimmered under neon heat, and news bulletins kept repeating the same impossible sentence. Elvis Presley is gone. Cher heard it over the radio in her dressing room at Caesar's Palace. The sound hit her like a punch. She turned off the lights, sat on the carpet, and stared at the white scarf hanging on her mirror. For a long time she couldn't move. The room smelled faintly of hairspray and roses from that night's show, but everything suddenly felt hollow. She whispered, You promised to keep singing too. That night she didn't perform. Instead, she wrote. On hotel stationery embossed with golden palms, she began a letter she never planned to mail. Dear Priscilla, I know you don't know me well, but I knew him once. Not the superstar, just the man who walked backstage and asked if I loved to sing. I thought you should know what he gave me. She paused, tears staining the page. He made me believe I didn't have to sound like anyone else. He gave me permission to be me before the world did. I think he did that for a lot of people without realizing it. She folded the letter halfway through, unable to finish. Some truths were too heavy to send. Instead, she slipped the pages into the same box that held the scarf and the tiny note that said keep singing, even when they stopped listening. Years passed. Cher became the woman Elvis had seen in that frightened girl. Unapologetic, powerful, impossible to ignore. But the box remained with her, moving from house to house like a secret altar. Then came 2017, 40 years since Elvis's passing. Caesar's Palace again. The same city, the same desert air humming with memory. Halfway through her show, the band faded into silence. The stage lights turned blue, the color of old photographs. Cher walked to the microphone holding something white in her hand. It was the scarf. This belonged to someone who believed in me before I did, she said softly. He told me to keep singing, so I did. For a few seconds, no one in the audience moved. Then a single cheer broke the stillness. Within moments, All 19,000 people were standing, applauding through tears. Cher smiled through the spotlight's glare. "This one's for Elvis." The band began the opening chords of Love Me Tender. Her voice trembled at first, then grew steady. Between verses, she held up the scarf, letting it catch the light like a ghost of 1967. When the song ended, the big screen behind her flickered to life. A photograph of Elvis at the International Amphitheater, wearing that same white scarf. The crowd gasped. Some covered their mouths. Others simply cried. For a moment, time folded in on itself. The young girl, the king, the promise, all existing in the same breath. Backstage after the show, her assistant found her sitting quietly, the scarf folded neatly beside her water glass. "You okay?"
Cher nodded.
"He kept his promise," she said. "Now I've kept mine." She never mentioned the letter publicly, but fragments of it appeared in a magazine years later when an interviewer asked if she'd ever written to Priscilla. Cher smiled and said, "I tried once. The words wouldn't fit in an envelope." Some fans believe that letter was burned, others that she still keeps it locked away. Maybe it doesn't matter. What matters is that she lived every word of it. Because sometimes a letter doesn't need to be sent to deliver its message. Sometimes the act of writing it is enough to let the heart speak. What if the greatest gifts we ever receive aren't things, but moments of belief from someone who saw us before we saw ourselves? In 1977, a singer lost her hero. In 2017, she thanked him in front of the world. And in between, she kept her promise, one performance, one breath, one song at a time. As the final spotlight faded that night in Las Vegas, she whispered into the darkness, "Thank you, Elvis." And somewhere, in the silence that followed, it felt like the king whispered back, "You kept singing." Today, inside Cher's private collection in Malibu, there's a glass case no bigger than a record sleeve. Inside it lies a simple white scarf, slightly frayed, one corner faintly tinted with stage makeup. Beneath it, a small handwritten note reads, "International Amphitheater, July 16, 1967. No spotlight shines on it. No label describes its value. But to Cher, it's the most priceless thing she owns. Every once in a while, when she walks past it before a show, she touches the glass and smiles. "Still singing," she whispers. "That scarf isn't just fabric. It's a symbol of how a small act of kindness can ripple through generations." Elvis could have walked past a nervous young singer that night. He could have said nothing, but instead, he gave her words that outlived them both. And the truth is, he didn't just help Cher. He changed the way she saw herself, and through her, the way the world saw women who dared to be bold, loud, and different. After that 2017 tribute, newspapers called it a full-circle moment 50 years in the making. But what they didn't know was that it wasn't about fame at all. It was about a promise between two artists, sealed by a scarf and 5 words. Keep singing, even when they stop listening. Historians later confirmed that Elvis had a habit of lifting up young performers. Joe Esposito once recalled, he'd find some kid backstage, scared out of their mind, and tell them something small, but it always stuck. He didn't mentor with grand speeches. He did it with sincerity. There's even a photograph, faded, black and white, of Elvis standing with a group of new singers backstage in 1970. On the edge of the frame, someone later noticed a familiar hand gesture. Elvis offering his scarf to another trembling performer. It became his quiet ritual. After his death, fans discovered dozens of thank you letters mailed to Graceland from singers who'd met him once, briefly, and never forgot what he'd said. One letter simply read, "You looked at me like I mattered." Cher's story wasn't unique, but it was the one that revealed what those moments meant. Because when she told it, people believed again in the idea that kindness could travel farther than fame. Today, young artists still talk about it. On forums, fans call it the scarf story. Some even visit Graceland hoping to glimpse a similar white scarf, wondering if it might be the one. It isn't, but that hardly matters. What matters is what it represents, belief, passed from one dreamer to another. In interviews, Cher always returns to the same phrase, "He saw me before the world did." Those 8 words explain everything. And maybe that's why her shows still open with an image of Elvis projected behind her. Smiling mid-performance, scarf flying. She never mentions him by name. She doesn't have to. The audience understands. Because some debts can't be repaid in words, only in legacy. If you walk the corridors of the International Amphitheater today, you won't find much left of that 1967 stage. The seats are gone. The paint has peeled. But there's a small brass plaque near where the dressing rooms used to be. It reads, "In memory of July 16, 1967, when the king handed a scarf and the world gained a star." Visitors still leave flowers there. Sometimes roses, sometimes small silk scarves tied gently to the railing. It's proof that moments of compassion can echo across decades. Elvis once said in an interview, "Music isn't about noise. It's about connection." Maybe that's why he gave away so many scarves. Each one was a bridge, a piece of himself offered to someone who needed to believe. Cher carried that bridge her whole life. And through her, millions crossed it without even knowing. Because at the end of every concert, when she steps into the light and the crowd rises, you can almost feel that same energy. The hush before the first note, the weight of a promise made half a century ago. Elvis's songs filled arenas. But it was what he said backstage that changed lives forever. Who might you be encouraging without even realizing it? Because the smallest kindness might be the one that echoes the longest. Elvis didn't just shape music. He shaped hearts. He saw talent where others saw uncertainty, and proved that a single act of belief can rewrite a person's story. One quiet moment backstage in 1967 didn't just change a young singer's life. It helped create Cher.